I'm Fredrik, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
And this is Pushback Talks, and Leilani, we are back.
We are back.
It's been like a little of a break. I don't know what happens. I guess...
It's been way too long. We've been busy.
We've been busy. Mm-hmm. But the podcast is out, and it'll
keep rolling. It's going to keep rolling.
We don't give up. And meanwhile, I found out that we now have downloads and listeners in 159 countries, which is a lot.
Whoa.
And
we're almost the United Nations.
The new ones coming in amongst them was Benin. That's a very small country. And the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Cool.
So, it's cool.
And that's probably because we had Paulina from Kenya in our last episode. Was that our last episode?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So listen to that one. It's really cool to be able to invite advocates and cool people to learn about what's going on around the world, away from the focus of the big media who are telling 2 or 3 stories at a time.
Exactly.
Most of them are U.S. election related, which is a bit boring.
Yeah.
So I've been out with my film. Last week I was in Warsaw at an amazing film festival called Against Gravity.
I saw that.
And in Poland, this festival is the biggest film festival in the country. 160,000 tickets sold.
Wow.
Only for documentaries. And young and really cool audience, a lot of people and very active.
So how are they reacting to your film? No, I want to hear. How did they react to your film?
Yeah, but I was also in Munich before that. You remember we were there with Push. Now I was back with Breaking Social. And I've been to Prague and to Brussels. And yeah.
Wow. And how are people reacting?
It's really cool reactions. In Germany, I invited some young climate activists because I found out that the activists in some way, the young generation, they are sending out bad news. The planet is going down.
Yes.
It must be very tough to be young and to carry that kind of message. And they find in the film another set of arguments that give them some kind of strength. And so they really like the film.
That's great.
And it becomes really emotional for many of them. So it's interesting. I mean, it's in some way a film gets born when then it meets audience and people find ways to use it. So it's really cool. So soon I'm going to Italy for the Italian premiere. Will be in Torino, and after that I go to the UK premiere in Sheffield, and then on.
I remember Sheffield.
And on, yeah.
And
so
on
it's
and
cool.
on. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm really glad Breaking Social is getting out there and that it is giving young people hope. I have been in a few meetings recently where I've seen this. Catastrophic thinking around climate change, which is totally understood. I'm not critical of that kind of end of the world thinking, but it is not a way to live. And it's bringing a lot of young people down. I mean, of course, I have young people in my household and they express these sentiments of, what's the future? What's the future?
Yeah. So, I mean... And in the film, in some way, one of the messages are hope. To be hopeful is also to show resistance, Yeah. So you can resist by just believing that we actually can change the world and that we can fight back.
Exactly.
But we're going to talk more about this because we also have a guest today.
We do have a guest. But can I just tell you my one little bit of news that's
of course
non-news, but it's not very hopeful news.
Uh-huh.
Maybe this is pathetic, but here it is. I have not been on Twitter in 2 weeks. I am off Twitter.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Isn't
it crazy? You know why? I have to say why. Because I started to feel hate from my own people. And I started to not like some of my own messages. And I just thought, if my own allies are against me, and if I'm I think I'm causing some of the strife, then maybe it's time to chill. So I've been chilling for 2 weeks. Am I a happier person? Maybe. Maybe.
I want you back though, but I mean,
yeah, I
you're
know.
not.
I'll go back. But I just needed a break.
Yeah, I
But
think
it's,
overall the social media, we have to be much more disciplined and be
Yes.
much more focused and on what message we're sending out, and not resend the provocations from stupid people. And
Exactly.
if you argue with friends, don't do it straight on.
Exactly.
Wait a little bit.
I'm with you. Anyway, that's my little update.
Sad, but you have a nice sound in your voice, so it's probably good. Yeah.
It's good. Yeah.
Our guest today is Rebecca Riddell. You know her from before because she was working for one of your colleagues as UN Special Rapporteurs.
It's true, I do.
Rebecca is now policy lead of economic justice at Oxfam America.
Amazing.
Which is really cool. She was before that co-director of Human Rights and Privatization Project at the NUY Law School, Center for Human Rights and Global Justice in New York. So, Rebecca, welcome to Pushback Talks.
Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I am a huge admirer of both this podcast and the work that both of you do. So thanks so much for having me on today.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's nice to have you here. Very exciting new position you have with Oxfam. I'm super excited to influence you. We'll get into that. Don't worry.
Oxfam is, I mean, I'm sure most of you know what Oxfam is because it's like, I love the original name of it, an Oxford Committee for Famine Relief. And it started in 1942 to support starving women and children in Greece during the Second World War.
Incredible.
But since 1995, Oxfam is now also a global alliance of human rights people, and it's with work and activities in 87 countries. So it's almost not as many as we have following our podcast, but it's still, but probably with better impact than we have. And for me, Oxfam has been an amazing inspiration, and the facts produced by Oxfam all the time are so useful in any conversation. So it's really cool to have you on, Rebecca. And so how is it to jump into this big organization? How do you just started? How is it?
Well, thanks so much for your kind words, which I can't really take credit for because obviously I just started. But on behalf of my colleagues, I mean, for me, it's a real pleasure to join the organization. I really appreciate that they recognize that to end poverty and injustice, we have to really tackle inequality. And so to that end, we're sort of in the process of starting a new economic justice program in the US that's really focused on challenging the extreme concentration of wealth and power that drives inequality. And, we're working on a few different planks of work, but for me, I'm very excited to see this type of work being done in the US, both to look at domestic policy, but then also the US's role internationally.
So it's cool. I mean, when I see the facts, the 1% richest of the world they have twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. I mean, all these facts coming up, they're so extreme. And of course, they're very, in some way, I like it because as a filmmaker, they're also visual. You can visualize that in some ways. But Leilani, you were right down, you've been traveling in the US, you were amongst others in Atlanta, and you had some other visuals in front of you that were not numbers, but people.
So I'd never been to Atlanta before, and I was really looking forward to it. People refer to Atlanta, Rebecca will know. Rebecca, I take it you're American, actually, right?
So yes, from Texas, in fact.
Oh, from Texas. So there you go. So Atlanta is known as the Black Mecca of the U.S. And I was excited to go to, a Black city in the U.S. I've been to other Black cities like Detroit, but and just to experience that and see what that was about. And it ended up being, a little soul destroying for me to see the homelessness. So Atlanta just named itself a human rights city. So there's an alliance of human rights cities around the world and a few in the US, and Atlanta has just become one. And I'm sitting there thinking, so I was having a coffee at a sort of groovy coffee place in downtown Atlanta and overlooking this pedestrian walkway. And it was kind of a cute pedestrian area for a, downtown city to have, but it was just filled with Black homeless people, really ill, obviously, many addicted to drugs, of course, often, mental health issues clearly, and just abject poverty. I mean, and obviously nowhere to live. And I mean, you're sitting there in the richest country in the world. It was as bad as San Francisco, and homelessness in San Francisco is as bad as it gets. LA. Anyway, I wasn't prepared for it. It actually, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't prepared for it. I don't know why. It really struck me, and I have to say, my sense was of such precarity, and this isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable. Like, what kind of a world is this?
Is that something you see also, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that there is an appropriate increasing awareness of the sort of deep insecurity and precarity that people face. I think, many folks in this country and elsewhere are facing severe deprivation, high costs for food, housing, energy. I mean, in the US, the racial wealth gap has been essentially unchanged since the 1970s, which is a huge injustice. And I think, I live in New York City, and so I experience a sort of similar disconnect between the immense wealth in the city and, how much of the city is just not for regular people. It's not for middle-class folks. It's not for working-class folks. Feels like the only new housing that's going in are these luxury buildings. And it can feel, very overwhelming to me as well. At the same time, I think it's encouraging that there are more conversations around the sort of structural issues that lead to this situation. I don't mean to be too Pollyanna about it, but I definitely understand where you're coming from, Leilani.
No, I think that's right, that the conversations are happening. And Fredrik's films, for example, provoke some of those conversations, and I do feel we're in new terrain. I mean, compared to when I started way back in 2014, when I was the UN rapporteur. No, we're on different terrain for sure. And Oxfam's contribution to that is huge.
I think, you haven't seen my film yet, Rebecca, but Rutger Bregman says in the film, when people are getting angry, change is already happening. So for me, when I see what the communication from Oxfam and the communication from you, Leilani, and a lot of other human rights people around the world, it could be the Save the Children or the Red Cross or Amnesty. A lot of people are saying the same thing. Can you also feel hopeful when there's it's a big choir now saying the same thing? The inequality it's too big. It's gone too far, everything.
For me, I do feel hopeful. I really believe in this work. And I think there's the part that's about anger, and that's really important. And I think there's also the part about creating a positive vision that's coming out of that. And that's also part of the shared project that we're doing. And for me, economic justice is one part of that, right? It's about having this shared vision of how the economy can work and who it can work for. And it's a positive co-owned vision that I think, as conversations we're having with our neighbors out in public, it's drawing on that anger. It's drawing on sort of our understanding and experiences. But I think there is a lot of momentum coming off of these conversations to have economic policies and systems that are really aimed towards that positive vision, whether it be fulfilling human rights or, providing housing, healthcare, et cetera. So I do have a lot of hope. I really believe in this work. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested to know, a big part of Oxfam's call, the one that we kind of, most of us would hear, especially around the time of the Davos meeting, is, more taxes, tax the rich, taxes, 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 as Bregman says, actually, a character, a person expert in Fredrik's film. Are you finding, I know it's early days for you, but do you find that resonates with everyday people? Do people have a sense that, wait a second, I have like a minimum wage job or a middle income job, and I'm paying more taxes than someone like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos? Does that resonate with people?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think people who are in many cases experiencing hardship, challenges, precarity, they know that the ultra rich are doing fabulously right now, right? One of our reports from earlier this year found that the richest 1% had grabbed 2/3 of all the wealth that's been created since 2020.
That's amazing numbers.
Crazy.
Exactly.
Can we repeat that? 1/3? No,
So-
2/3. 2/3.
Yeah, 2/3. So the richest 1% of all the new wealth that's been created since 2020, they grabbed 2/3, right? And this since 2020 has been a rough time, right? A lot of people have not had a good pandemic.
1% so the 99% could share 1/3 of the growth, and
Right.
1% took 2/3. It's alarming numbers.
And I think people realize, I think they know that this isn't by accident, right? That it's by design. They look at the collapse of taxes on the super rich, that billionaires are paying tax rates of 3% in some cases, that we've, and beyond tax, that we've got international rules that really, shore up corporate interests. They favor global monopolies that enrich shareholders at the expense of the common good. And I think you can see that in a lot of the sort of public opinion polling as well. There's actually often very broad support for raising taxes on the ultra rich and on corporations. People want them to pay their fair share.
Yeah. So that will mean that it will happen, but it's difficult that it will happen because the super rich invest in strategic communication and in lobby and also by straight paying, supporting politicians' campaigns and so on. So it's very hard to make that change.
And they're expert at hiding their money. So taking it offshore, making it harder to actually know how much money needs to be taxed. Yeah. That's a big part of the equation, obviously. And I know Oxfam is well aware of that, as is Transparency International, for example, right?
Yeah. I think, to the point about, the sort of the power that the 1% have. I mean, I think one wall that we're going to keep hitting if we don't think big picture is that the 1%, they haven't just written the policies, right? They haven't just written these rules that'll let them hide their money and let them pay low taxes, et cetera. They've written the policies, but they've also written the story of the economy. Yeah. And so, the myth that tax cuts are for the rich are really great for everybody, or the myth that, people are rich or poor because of something they did rather than for structural reasons. Those are very convenient myths if you're rich. Yeah. And, that's why I think the work that both of you do is so important, because we need to be telling a different story, and we need to have that positive vision of what we're trying to do with our economies and with our rules that we're working towards if we're going to make progress on any of these issues.
Yeah, because what you said right now about how they create the explanation models on why we have to not cut the taxes and so on. Many of my films are a little bit about that, the explanation models and how they are creating this. And it's, in some way, I think it gets lost in the public debate when an election is lost or whatever. It's like we don't see the role of strategic communication and how unfair it is that the people with most money are buying most strategic communication. Of course, Oxfam is also a lobbyist in some way, but you don't have that kind of resources that Elon Musk or Bezos and the other guys have. Mm. So of course, that's a very unfair war in some way. And I think we really have to look deeper into that and make more people understand that we're up against their storytelling also. I hope my films are used in that in some ways. And I think one of the successes of Push is that Leilani's message of housing is a human right in some way kicked out the expression housing market. Because, suddenly it's not a super radical thing to say, but it's a hell of a different story.
Mm-hmm. I think this issue of narrative building is huge, actually. And we had on the podcast, you'll recall, Anand Giridharadas. And one of the things he says in his book, The Persuaders, is that progressives have been pretty bad at creating narrative of our vision of the world. And I agree with him about that, and definitely have always felt in my advocacy that that's part of the equation of making change, is to build a really strong narrative. What's scaring me now about, well, and has for a while, I suppose, about people with a lot of money, or corporations or private equity firms with a lot of money, is not only are they controlling the narrative about what's good for them and what's good for the world, but when they admit that the world is in crisis, which they're starting to do, right? So they're starting to embrace the fact that we have a climate change problem. They're starting to embrace the fact that inflation is problematic for some people in some nations. But they're very effective at putting themselves forward as the solution. That's part of their narrative. And we had Peter S. Goodman on as well on our show, and he talked about that, the way they've positioned themselves. They've caused so much of these crises. I mean, Oxfam, in Oxfam's Survival of the Richest report from this year, you talk about the climate impact of billionaires, right? That they have a bigger carbon footprint with all that money of theirs, right, than other actors. So they're causing all of these polycrises, and yet they're putting themselves forward as the solution. And that's a narrative that we really need to somehow tackle.
So, can we afford the rich?
Yeah, can we afford the rich? Brilliant question, right? From Breaking Social. I don't know, Rebecca, like, as in your new role, presumably this is some of the stuff you're grappling with.
Yeah, and I think, I completely agree with the question. This is also something in my role just before this, I was, co-leading this research and advocacy initiative at New York Law School that looked at privatization and financialization and its impacts on people. So we partnered with a lot of communities and movements to kind of document and expose some of the risks of that. And it's amazing because a lot of the actors in this space are the, quote unquote good guys who are working in the development space to, ostensibly promote access to services, but are, absolutely confident that the private sector should play a big role in this, and that financialization is key to getting the resources where they need to be. And I think it's very interesting to see this again come up in conversations now, which is the same people that have, in many ways contributed to the dynamics that we're concerned with, that people on the podcast listeners are concerned with. They are now stepping in to provide a new set of solutions. But a lot of the same dynamics, the same interests are at play. And I think that is why it's so important that we talk about whose vision we have. And I think it's important that it be, a ground up vision of what we want. One that really is informed by common sense, by people's choices, by democratic decision making, by having a strong, sense of the public good that's the result of robust discussions. I know it can seem very abstract, but I think it's that sort of power that comes from the people is the best antidote to these sort of technocratic solutions that end up reinforcing the dynamics that we've already seen for decades.
Mm. I mean, the can we afford a rich question is, of course, provocative, and it's maybe in some way simplified. The climate activists in Germany, they took a hotel in Berlin and put up a big banner and called it, "Can we afford the super rich?" So maybe that's even clearer in some way. But of course, I also believe that people with a lot of resources, people who are rich, are also suffering of the divide in society. Divide kind of bad for everyone. I mean, if you step out on the streets of Atlanta or in San Francisco or wherever you go, and you see the streets of your town filled with people who are suffering, it's horrible for anyone. Of course, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they can always fly over that with their helicopters or whatever. But a lot of other people are suffering because this kind of the social contract is so broken. So it's painful for all. And I really hope that people with resources will join in and support Oxfam and, come in and watch my film and take part of a conversation. Of course, it's not about building camps. I think we need to build a very broad union of people, of forces. For me, this is not about left and right. It's about decency and not decency. And I think that's what I'm really happy that Oxfam is a part of that. But I want to ask you, Rebecca, because the extreme right, the provocative right, I mean, the Trumps and all these, their new technique is to basically to tell everyone who is decent that they are left-wing Marxists, and I guess that also goes for Oxfam. They, now suddenly it was Amanda Gorman's poetry from the inauguration of Biden was suddenly radical. It's like it's their techniques of putting everybody else in a corner it's a bit dangerous. How do you see this? This kind of decent middle of the road organization as Oxfam suddenly is like pushed into a corner by these forces. How do you handle it?
Yeah, just to pick up on something you were talking about, I think that, if we want to get the policies that we're talking about that represent economic justice, if we want to get higher taxes, universal public services, social protection, we absolutely need to be working in coalition. And there is very exciting work being done, worker organizing in the U.S. South you've got these amazing, multiracial coalitions of working class folks who are really building power. And you take that, you've also got groups in the U.S. like Patriotic Millionaires, which is a pro-tax, tax the rich organization that really, constituted by wealthy folks who say, yeah, this is not right. We agree. We should be taxed more. And so I think those coalitions are absolutely key so that, you're bringing different types of pressure on policymakers and so that you can kind of avoid this left-right dynamic. Just one anecdote, I was recently at this anti-monopoly conference and a policymaker there was talking about when she was pushing for, a piece of antitrust legislation that a large corporation did not see in its interests. And the corporation blanketed the airwaves in her district, with these ads, totally inaccurate, sort of casting all these aspersions. So that's so personal. They really went after her and they said to her constituents, like, this is what your representative's doing. And I think, really understanding the different alliances that we need to build to shift things and even being able to understand that when policymakers and other potential champions of this work are out there, like, we need to have their backs when they're doing the right thing, which is not a reason not to criticize them when they're not. Like, I don't mean to suggest that, but I think like that sort of awareness of the different pieces of this puzzle. And, I've really had the benefit of learning from so many amazing organizers and activists how important coalition work is. And I'm really convinced of that.
That's cool. Leilani?
Yeah, I have a few comments on the coalition building front. When we were forming the shift, that was front and center of how we wanted to form, which was the idea of, we're not going to make a paradigmatic shift, the size and nature that we need to in the area of housing without speaking to people we wouldn't normally speak with. And, creating that big tent, as they say. And I have to say, when I committed to that, I didn't really know what it meant. And now, a few years in, the shift is about 3 years old as an organization. And I can say I've had some really, really hard conversations and conversations that are unpleasant. And it's very hard to create coalitions that work and to talk across difference. But of course, changing the world, who thought it was going to be easy, I suppose, right? So yeah, I'm sweating all the time and so many disappointments. But what I'm always saying these days is we're going to make mistakes and things will go backward before they go forward. And I'm finding that I work with a lot of city governments, for example, and I can be sitting at the table with them and talking about the need for them to understand homeless people, for example, as rights holders. And they can be nodding and saying yes, and at the same time evicting them from the public square, right? Right at the same time. And it's very uncomfortable for me, obviously, because I believe in continuing to talk to them, even though they're doing outrageous things. And the same, I've been sitting with real estate investment trusts, and they can speak some good language, but do some really bad things. So it's tough. I just want to say that. I mean, for all of us out there struggling with this, it's tough. But what else can we do, right? I think we have no option but to continue to talk across difference. I don't know.
From my perspective, I said in the opening, I'm so inspired by such a force like Oxfam is constantly sending out food for thoughts and arguments that we can use in our day-to-day conversations. And I think the day-to-day conversations are so important. And I think you should just keep doing that. But I know that, Leilani, inequality, housing plays a role. It's hard to pay the rent these days. How do you see this?
Sure is. Well, I'm really interested to know if Rebecca is going to take it on in her new position. I mean, we know that in the U.S., there isn't a single county, and you know this, Rebecca, from your work with Philip Alston, who was the former special rapporteur on extreme poverty. He did a very important country visit to the United States. Rebecca was part of that, very much part of that. I followed it very closely, and you learned, Rebecca, in your travels that there isn't a single county in the U.S. where a person working full-time, making minimum wage, can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. There isn't a single county. And so we know that housing is part of the equation. I know that residential real estate now accounts for almost 70% of global net worth. So when we're talking about these uber rich people, we have to, and corporations and entities, we have to talk, for me, from my side, we have to talk about where they're deriving this incredible wealth from. And real estate is it. Not the only area, but certainly a predominant area. But I'm interested because Oxfam hasn't embraced housing as an area. Even when Oxfam talks about inflation and the impact of inflation, they'll talk about food, stagnating wages, but not the cost of housing. So,
Rebecca,
is it an area you're going to move into, Rebecca? Only subtle pressure from a global advocate.
Yeah, I mean, you are an advocate through and through, Leilani. Well, first, I just want to say, in response to your comments on discomfort, on the challenges, on the sort of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think I want to just say you're preaching to the choir. Like, I think it's so important to talk about that in our work, that it isn't about, these things aren't easy. And so just to not, sort of pretend like, oh, this just rolls straight on, no problems. Like being accountable to people is important. Extending trust, but also being deserving of trust is really important. And all of those things take time. And so, what you said really resonated with me. And then on housing, so I should stress I'm speaking in my personal capacity as a human rights lawyer because Oxfam America does not currently do much work on housing. But first I would say, Leilani, please come to New York City. Bring the shift directives, which are amazing and transformational and have, all of these sort of important, incredible elements, and also this foundation of saying housing is a human right. It should function as housing before it should function as a financial instrument. That's like,
yeah,
it's crazy because it seems really like basic, but it's like not how it's functioning currently. I mean, I think there was an article yesterday because the city's sort of official responsible for housing has stepped down, and I think 600,000 households in New York pay more than half their income on rent. 80,000 people nearly 80,000 people were in the shelter system this month.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the sort of response is, I mean, a lot of organizers and a lot of policymakers put a lot of energy this year into trying to come up with some solutions and eventually just couldn't reach an agreement. So that really says something about the depth of the different interests here.
But I'm thinking of when you say we should tax the rich, and then the rich are then parking a huge part of their wealth into our homes.
Exactly.
So there is a very straight relation, and it's I mean, the amazing amount of speculation on top of our roofs. I mean, we have in some way that this is like destroying our societies, because it's not only our homes, it's also the coffee shop in the corner. It's like everything becomes more. Basically, we are paying tax to the rich. So it's in some ways the other way around. They don't pay taxes, but we pay taxes when we pay rent to them, which is like, it's not right. So what can we do? And how can Oxfam move your focus or make it a little bit clearer? It would be interesting.
Direct pressure from Fredrik. There you go, Rebecca. I was so subtle in comparison.
Fredrik, I thought you were the filmmaker, not the advocate. What's going on?
I'm just shooting from the hip. So
we reverse roles. I'm going to start making films. He's the advocate. I think the world will be a worse place for that. Sorry, I'm no filmmaker, but he's a good advocate. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to weigh in, actually, not to put you on too much on the spot, Rebecca, because it's hard. You can't dictate the policy of Oxfam, of course. But my sense recently, I've been doing a fair few speeches recently, and I've been talking about upside down world. And upside down world is a world where all this wealth is being accumulated through housing, and homelessness is increasing, right? So that's like upside down world. But even worse is when you start really chipping away at what constitutes a GDP. So how is a GDP formed? What you find is housing and housing related monies, revenues, really are a huge part of most GDPs right now. And I look at my own country, we moved up a GDP ranking. Canada went from 10th to 9th in 2019. And we've had pretty steady, not huge, but steady economic growth during the pandemic. So 2020 until 2022, 2023. And when I look at where that economic growth is derived in Canada, all of it has been through real estate. And so when we're thinking about, okay, how are we going to tackle inequality? There's just no way around looking at, okay, well, how are GDPs constituted? What is driving inequality? And at the end of the road, Oxfam, like any other organization, is going to get to the real estate question or problem, because our societies and developing economies are being based in real estate. And that's for sure. It's seen as a vehicle for economic growth. And not just building new, but renovating, which is, all these renovations. And now we are in the green era, right? So green renovations, all of this is seen as good for economic growth. And so there's no way around it. Eventually Oxfam will get there, and I'll help you get there. So there's your answer, Rebecca.
Well, Rebecca, I have no intention to frame you in any way. I'm just interested to see, because I really think that Oxfam's work is so important. So how do we this connection between all that speculative money placed on top of our homes? How can we, if I don't say Oxfam, how can we address this sharper? Because we need also to put some indication to our politicians, to our lawmakers, how to handle this. I mean, we've told a story about this plebiscite in Berlin where they wanted to expropriate the homes. It hasn't happened because it's, of course, extremely complicated. But I mean, for many years, our homes were not on the market. It was like it's like a separate economy. But suddenly they are all on the market. Everything is on the market. You know, our schools, our hospitals. It's like I mean, in the US it's been so for a long time, but it's also now happening over in Europe. And this financialized world creates its own problems. So how can we get parts of the economy out of this speculation bubble? I mean, in some way, that's the way we need to go. I mean, you've said it, Leilani, it's not about capitalism. We can have capitalism as long as they respect the planet and human rights. Okay, fine. But okay, respect the planet and human rights.
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally agree. You know, in the work I did with the Rapporteur on Poverty, we had the opportunity to, visit communities around the world who are deeply impacted by the financialization of housing, right? We saw, widespread violations of people's rights to housing, informal settlements that lacked basic services but had been there for decades, folks who are facing mass evictions. We had the opportunity to meet with the organizers of tenants outside of Madrid who their social housing had been purchased by Blackstone and their rents had gone up drastically overnight. And, I am, so excited by work like the Shift Directives. I think that's a really important direction to head in. And, I will say something that we've been working on that it's sort of in a similar vein is wealth taxes, which are, when you bring in a wealth tax or, a direct tax on the net wealth of individuals, you can really start getting at some of the, massive inequality that we see. You can tackle the racial wealth gap. You can raise tremendous funds to invest in social services, including, for example, public housing. And so I think, that those are some additional ways or sort of different tools to think about this. But I'm really excited by everything that Leilani is doing and look forward to many cities becoming shift cities if I had it my way.
I have a question for you, Rebecca, about taxation, because obviously Oxfam puts a premium on taxation, which makes sense. And you just mentioned the idea that just taxing uber wealthy people, individuals of ultra high net worth, would go some distance to providing social protections. I wanted to ask you about how do we make sure that that's what gets done with taxes that get raised, rather than seeing all those taxes go to, for example, the war in Ukraine or to arm Israel, right? Which is where a lot of US-based money is going at the moment. What does Oxfam suggest as, is it tied taxation, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. That's why I think in many ways, I mean, this is just me speculating as a human being. I think the conversation around taxing the rich, I think the conversation on the money you could raise from sort of taxing the ultra wealthy, it's really important, but it has to also be connected with a conversation about our vision, has to be connected with a conversation about what is it spent on. And that conversation has to involve regular people. Yeah, this cannot be a technocratic decision-making process that is simply not going to get us towards a human rights economy. And so I think that it's not my vision, it's not your vision. It should be our vision that we develop in common, and that should determine where the sort of revenue that could be raised should be spent.
Yeah, and Leilani, I can also say that I would say tax the rich without really know how to do it, yeah. Because I'm not a tax expert, I mean, but so I think it's still an important thing to have on the table. And I really I know that the Green Party in Europe on the European level are also going to raise a campaign around tax justice. And I think that the more voices that comes behind this, the more important it is, of course. So I'm really cool to have you there at Oxfam in New York, Rebecca.
Yeah, I am too. But you can tax the rich and still create inequality. That's my only point, right?
Absolutely.
And we don't want that outcome. I mean, that's what's that's the global thinking, right? So we can tax the rich and I'm going to be provocative here, and give that money, tax the rich in the US and give that money to Israel and create gross inequality in Palestine, right? I mean, just to be provocative, there's other ways too. So we can tax the rich and create so-called green economy that's actually not as green as it needs to be, right? Sorry, go ahead.
But we can tax the rich and then talk about how to divide the money.
Sure.
I mean, come on.
Exactly.
So there will be new debates coming up.
Yeah. But I like what Rebecca said, which was when we say tax the rich, we need it to be part of this broader narrative of a economy that produces human rights outcomes. Or that's the language I'm using these days. And I think that's right, that it's tax the rich to produce human rights outcomes.
Yeah. But to our listeners out there, I mean, what do you think about tax the rich? And what about, can we afford the rich? You can please write to us on Twitter, to Leilani and me, and maybe also Rebecca.
He's forcing me back to Twitter.
And tell us what you think. And if Leilani is not answering, tag also me, and I can be a part of it. And then I will call her and say, come on, you have to open up your Twitter account again. Even if we don't really like Elon Musk. We don't.
Yeah, I'm an occasional Twitter user. So I probably, of the three of us here, I think I am the most circumspect about Twitter engagement. But I am there, of course. So, of course.
I mean,
feel free to tag me.
Twitter is good because I meet a lot of activists and interesting people. So it's very hard to be without it. And for us who we have a new film coming out, we need to be on all these platforms. But I think it's very much about keeping some kind of discipline out there, not entering into all stupid debates that's going on.
I agree.
To focus on.
No, it depressed me. Depressed me to go off Twitter.
Yeah.
I had to, but it's to do what you said, Fredrik. It's to reform my own behavior and my own interactions. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, how can we work with Oxfam? I mean, now you're just started up in your new work, but I mean, I would really like to meet Oxfam people around the world with my film, for example. I mean, sometimes for us filmmakers, when we have a new film out, we try to reach out to NGOs, and we find that the NGOs they like what we do, but then they don't really help us because they're all in their last campaign. They're new. I mean, this is like and this is not Oxfam I'm talking about. It could be anyone who love our work, but I mean, the day NGOs start to also embrace independent film and use the power of film, the emotional power of film, maybe you can also be a part of a conversation. I actually had one intern here who I put to walk through all the Oxfam facts, and he wrote to me and said, Fredrik, I get numb after a while. These facts are only facts, and in the end, I don't feel anything. And of course, that's why we do films, because films in some way are also creating emotions, and emotions that stays with people and opens up for a conversation. Yeah. And in that conversation, I would like to have people at Oxfam sitting with people, talking with people when the emotions are up. You know, we can't be everywhere, but you have people all over the world, 87 countries. You know, so please use independent films. I mean, you just started your work, but
we're giving you a tall list of things to do, Rebecca. But that being said, I will say this: I would love to join you in New York and do a thing for Oxfam on the shift directives. We could do a little session of some sort.
That sounds great. And Fredrik, I would love to, I mean, I think we have so much to learn from your films and so much to learn from storytelling in general. If our goal is to move us closer, if you know what we're doing is spending our lives as part of a long, very long, much longer arc of trying to move closer towards justice, right? Then storytelling is so essential to that. And I think we have a lot to learn. And so I would absolutely love to pursue discussions about that. And yes, Leilani, excellent. Let's hang out soon. Perfect. And yeah.
You know what, girls? We've been talking for 52 minutes. It's
wow.
like it's a very long.
It didn't feel like that. It went fast.
No, it was like so interesting. And Rebecca, I think the only way to solve this is to be able to call you again after like when you've been in your work for some longer time, and then Leilani can be even nastier, and I can be friendlier. I don't know.
An external performance review on a podcast. I love it.
That's right. That's right. Well, Oxfam is lucky to have you, Rebecca. I think it's great that you've joined their team, and I'm looking forward to working with you there.
Yeah,
super cool.
And thank you very much for your time and if we stepped over sometimes, we are so sorry, but this is how we are. We are never really sorry.
It's a false apology.
Exactly.
Well, that's not a good way to end a podcast.
Totally.
Let me assure you, it has been both an honor and a pleasure to chat with the two of you today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I look forward to continuing to listen to your amazing podcast, to viewing Breaking Social, and, sharing the messages with everyone else. And so, yeah, I can't wait to be in touch. And thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leilani. It's how do we fund this podcast? We don't fund it.
We don't.
No, it's just silly. But there are actually like 50 people out there putting some small money into Patreon. That's actually right. Quite cool.
Go to patreon.com, look for Pushback Talks.
It gives us like almost $300 a month. It's like it's a lot.
It's a huge amount. That's right.
So we are, as you see, we're rich. We are the super rich in emotions.
I want to invite our listeners to give us some suggestions for podcast topics, people to interview. We are always open, looking for cool and new stories or old stories told in a new way.
Yeah, we are curious people. We don't have so much time. That's a little bit of a challenge, but it's fine. So talk soon, Leilani, and thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Fredrik.
Pushback Talks is produced by WG Film. To support the podcast, become a patron by going to patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Follow us on social media at make_the_shift and at push_the_film. Or check out our websites, maketheshift.org, pushthefilm.com, or breakingsocialfilm.com.